Hey everyone, welcome back to Corporate Decoder, the place where we decode the hidden meanings behind corporate jargon and financial filings, so you don't have to. And today we have a really interesting one, a retirement fund report. Bet you thought this would be boring, right? Well, hold on to your hats because we are going to see what this fund's money is actually doing behind the scenes. So what exactly is this document? You ask, it's a certified shareholder report for a registered investment company. It's basically a peek under the hood of tea. Rowe Price Retirement Funds Incorporated. Specifically, this one is about the Retirement Blend 2020 fund and its investor class and I-class shares. It covers the period from the 1st of June 2025 to the 30th of November 2025. Let's talk about what your money is actually costing you for a hypothetical $10,000 investment in the investor class of the Retirement Blend 2020 fund. Your costs for these 6 months were $18. This works out to 0.35% of your investment. Now for the I-class of the same fund, that $10,000 investment would have cost you only $10, which is 0.20%. So as you can see, the I-class is a bit cheaper. Now for some key numbers about the fund, the total net assets for this fund stand at a pretty significant $391,492,000. And how many investments does it hold to achieve that? Well, it is invested in 26 different holdings. The portfolio turnover rate is 13.2%. This number tells us how often the fund buys and sells its holdings. A lower turnover rate generally means the fund is holding on to its investments for longer periods, which can sometimes indicate a more buy and hold strategy. Now let's dive into what the fund actually invests in. Asset allocation is crucial. In understanding a fund's strategy, the fund has a significant portion in domestic equity funds at 37.5%. This means a good chunk of your money is invested in stocks from companies based in the United States, following that we have domestic bond funds at 32.6% making up a sole ID portion of the portfolio. International equity funds hold 13.6% and international bond funds are at 12.8%, finally short. Term and other investments make up the remaining 3.5%. This mix suggests a balanced approach aiming for growth from equities while trying to mitigate risk with bonds both domestic and international. Let's dissect the top 10 holdings to see where the real action is. The largest holding is the T. Rowe Price QM US Bond Index Fund at 14.8%. This is followed closely by the T. Rowe Price Equity Index 500 Fund at 13.8%, which gives you exposure to the top 500 US companies. Then we have the T. Rowe Price US Limited Duration Tips Index Fund at 11.9%. Tips funds are designed to protect against inflation, so that's an interesting inclusion. The fund also holds the T. Rowe Price International Equity Index Fund at 6.7% and the T. Rowe Price International Bond Fund USD hedged at 5.5%. The remaining top holdings include the T. Rowe Price Hedged Equity Fund at 5.2%, the T. Rowe Price Value Fund at 4.9%, the T. Rowe Price Growth Stock Fund at 4.7%, the T. Rowe Price Real Assets Fund at 3.4%, and rounding out the top 10 is the T. Rowe Price Dynamic Global Bond Fund at 3.2%. This list tells us the fund heavily relies on other T. Rowe Price funds, meaning it is essentially a fund of funds strategy. Now let's look at the actual financial performance, which everyone cares about. The financial highlights section is where we can see how the fund has been doing over time for the 6 months ended the 30th of November 2025. The investor class saw a net asset value per share of $11.09. The total return for this period was 8.73%. This is a pretty decent return for a 6-month period. The I-class also ended at $11.09 per share with a total return of 8.83% for the same period. It's interesting to note that both classes ended up at the exact same net asset value per share, despite some slight differences in their returns and expense ratios. This usually points to how gains and losses are being allocated and distributed across the different share classes for the full year ended May 31, 2025. The investor class had a total return of 8.62% and the I-class had 8.81%. Digging deeper into the portfolio of investments, we see a breakdown of the fund's holdings as of the 30th of November 2025. Bond funds make up 45.4% of the portfolio. The largest component within bond funds is the T. Rowe Price QM US Bond Index Fund, which has a value of $57,854,000. Other significant bond holdings include the US Limited Duration Tips Index Fund at $46,704,000 and the International Bond Fund USD hedged at $21,329,000. Equity funds represent a larger portion at 51.1%. The Equity Index 500 Fund is the largest equity holding, valued at $53,986,000. Other large equity holdings are the International Equity Index Fund at $26,334,000 and the Hedged Equity Fund at $20,267,000 short-term investments, including the T. Rowe Price US Treasury Money Fund make up 3.5%, totaling $13,856,000. The total investments in securities for the fund come out to $391,566,000. This confirms the total net assets we saw earlier. This section is particularly interesting. It details the fund's investments in what are called affiliated companies, which for a T. Rowe Price fund means other T. Rowe Price funds, as these are related entities. The report shows that for the 6 months ended the 30th of November 2025, there was a net realized gain or loss and a change in net unrealized gain or loss from these affiliated companies. For instance, the Equity Index 500 fund contributed a net realized gain of $64,000 and a significant change in net unrealized gain of $6 million. $672,000. Similarly, the US Limited Duration Tips Index Fund had a net realized loss of $12,000, but experienced a substantial unrealized gain of $736,000. The total net realized gain or loss across all these affiliated companies for the period was a net loss of $82,000, while the change in net unrealized gain or loss was a positive $24,002,000. This shows that while there were some realized losses on sales of underlying funds, the overall value of the fund's investments in these affiliated entities has grown substantially due to market appreciation. Looking at the statement of assets and liabilities as of the 30th of November 2025, the total net assets are confirmed at $391,492,000. This is broken down into the value of investments at $391,566,000, and liabilities are relatively small at just over $2 million, the net asset value. Pairs here for both investor class and I class is listed as $11.09. The statement of operations for the 6 months ended the 30th of November 2025 shows the fund's income and gains investment income distributions from underlying price funds were $5,186,000 after accounting for investment management, and administrative expenses, the net investment income, was $4,793,000. The realized and unrealized gains and losses are also detailed with a net realized loss of $82,000 on sales of underlying price funds, but a substantial change in net unrealized gain of $24,002,000. This results in a total increase in net assets from operations of $28,713,000 for the period. This statement provides a clear picture of how the fund's net assets have changed over time for the 6 months. Ended the 30th of November 2025, the fund saw an increase in net assets from operations of $28,713,000. There were no distributions to shareholders during this 6-month period. Capital share transactions, however, contributed positively with an increase of $64,730,000. $8,000. This means that more shares were bought than redeemed overall. The net assets increased by $93,451,000 during this period, bringing the total net assets to $391,492,000 from a beginning of period $298,041,000. Now for the footnotes, these are usually dense but can hold critical information. The fund is an open-end management investment company. It invests in a portfolio of other T's. Rowe Price stock and bond funds, the fund's allocation among these underlying funds will change over time, making its asset mix more conservative as it approaches its target date. This is a common strategy for target date retirement funds. The fund seeks the highest total return over time consistent with an emphasis on both capital growth and income. It has 2 share classes, investor class and I class. The I class has a higher investment minimum, but typically lower fees. The notes also explain the valuation of the fund's investments. Investments in underlying price funds are valued at their closing net asset value. Per share, meaning they are not actively trading individual stocks or bonds themselves, but rather relying on the NAV of the funds they invest in. This confirms the fund of funds structure. All of the fund's financial instruments were classified as Level 1 as of the 30th of November 2025. Level 1 assets are those valued using Q. Quoted prices in active markets for identical instruments, which implies a high degree of liquidity and transparency for these holdings within the T. Rowe Price family of funds. Here we see details about the fund's investment management agreement. The fund pays an annual all-inclusive fee that ranges from 0.44 to 0.34% for the investor class and 0.26 to 0.19%. For the I class, this fee generally declines as the fund reduces its stock exposure along its investment glide path. The fee covers investment management services and operating expenses, excluding things like interest expense. Taxes and brokerage fees at the 30th of November 2025, the effective annual all-inclusive fee rate was 0.35% for the investor class and 0.20% for the I class. This reinforces the I class being the more cost-effective option for investors. So what does all this tell us? Well, the Retirement Blend 2020 Fund is a diversified fund that invests in a basket of other T. Rowe Price. Fund's strategy is to provide total return through capital growth and income. While becoming more conservative over time, it's a fund of funds, meaning your investment is managed by T. Rowe Price, through their other underlying funds, the financial performance for the period ending the 30th of November 2025 shows positive returns for both share classes, with a total return of around 8.7 to 8.8% for the 6-month period. This is a solid performance, especially considering the current market environment. The fund's assets are primarily invested in domestic and international equities and bonds, with a significant portion in index funds and actively managed funds. When we look at the big picture, the fund is operating efficiently, with its expense ratios for the I class being particularly competitive at 0.20%, the fact that the fund heavily relies on other T. Rowe Price Fund simplifies its management structure, but also means its performance is directly tied to the performance of those underlying funds. The fact that all investments are valued at level 1, according to the fair value hierarchy, indicates that the underlying assets have readily available market prices and are considered liquid. This is good news for investors, as it suggests transparency and ease of valuation. The main risk here is the inherent risk of the underlying asset classes and the fund manager's ability to select and manage them effectively while managing the glide path as intended. The consistent performance and conservative fee structure for the I class make it an attractive option for long-term retirement investors who are looking for a diversified and professionally managed portfolio. Alright, that is our breakdown of the Retirement Blend 2020 Fund's latest filing. What is your take on these numbers and what they signal for the fund's future performance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this analysis was valuable, hitting that like button really helps, and subscribe for more deep dives into corporate filings. Don't forget to check out the Discord community link in the description below. Thanks for watching. See you next time.